Good afternoon and welcome to our Lenten reflection. I'm Randy Sherrill, the teaching pastor here at Fletcher United Methodist Church, and we're going to be looking at what I preached on today, what the Tuesday evening study group took stock of this previous Tuesday. And for me, this is one of the core teachings that Jesus gave. To me, it and the parable of the Good Samaritan, and as Belinda did with the children, and also in tandem with the anthem and the children in the performance group, it's a series of parables of the lost, but again, the headings and titles of the different things are editor additions later and were not included in the actual gospel text. And so I like the way that Belinda dealt with that finally these are not parables of the lost, but of the found. And so we're going to be looking at the prodigal from several different directions, and also doing some extensions of the unanswered questions that occur and arise from this lesson. So, Ronnie, would you like to read this again?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Be glad to. Ronnie Lesher, I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version from Gospel of Luke, chapter 15. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became very angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, he who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, You are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. We had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.
Thank you, Ronnie. Again, like I said, I believe this is, if we have a conversation with someone who is seeking to know about being a Christian, this would be one of the places that I think I would invite them to sit with, and the Samaritan and several other of the parables. So, it begins with the setting of the context at the beginning of the chapter. And then we have the other two parables, and then the major one at the end. And we see who's in the crowd, tax collectors and sinners. Again, we don't know the number or the general crowd. What would you imagine between the sinners, tax collectors, and other common people, and then the Pharisees and some of the other Jewish leaders? What might be some of the range of experiences and attitudes in that crowd listening to this parable? What's their place of assumption as they hear the story unwind?
Well, I think they could relate to the family environment and the situation, and probably some were landed and could relate to dividing up the property or the plans they had for division of the property and when. And I think other people could maybe be on the side, or the experience of the younger brother or even the older brother, that they felt they could empathize with their situation, but may have been puzzled by the resolution of it when they came to the end. I'm sure there were more than one that went, he did what? He killed the fatted calf and celebrated this kid's return? Shouldn't have done that. Should have made him pay back what he got. And I think that would have been probably more scriptural from the Old Testament than what Jesus is trying to point out.
Yeah. Other responses in the crowd?
Well, to me, the younger brother was for the sinners, for the regular people. And the older brother was for the religious people, telling them that they weren't perfect either, because they also rejected the Father.
Yeah. In a very simple setting, Jesus pulled all the people probably there into the parable. Even the people who said, well, I'm not a Jewish leader, I don't lead worship at the temple, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not dirt poor, but I imagine they could feel themselves in there somewhere. Now, other times in the Gospels we hear, after Jesus has had a period of teachings, that we have instances of where the disciples, when they have their own private time, they come back and say, Jesus, you got a minute? We didn't quite get that. And one of my thoughts was thinking about, I can imagine that sometime in the next few days or a week or two, that at least a few of the disciples cornered Jesus and said, Jesus, we've been talking about that, and that's tough. That's a long distance to go. Do you really mean that? And that's one of the things that's outside the text that I would wonder about. I would almost guarantee that there had to be some further conversations between Jesus and the disciples about this, because
I think they might have asked, who was the father, who is the younger brother, and who's the older brother? Because maybe they couldn't, like us, don't know who Jesus is really trying to talk about.
or like Keith had said, that you made the assumption, okay, the dutiful are the Pharisees, and the sinners are the ones who just blow everything quickly. All right, Henry Nouwen, and I imagine some of you have read his Return of the Prodigal, and I won't get there to the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, but I think the painting is 8 by 4 or 8 by 6 feet. I mean, it is a large, and most of the art scholars believe that he painted it within the last 2 or 3 years of his life. And it was one of his most major works. And it's as subtle and multi-layered as Jesus' parable, because you have the Father and the Son, and then you have 3 other figures that are discernible, less discernible, barely discernible, and then right up here in the upper left corner is just kind of a visage of there's another person that's in the painting. And through some friends, Nouwen, who also was Dutch, got to go and got private time. All that he wanted, the guards were told he has permission to be here, and he can sit and venerate and take in this painting as long as he wants. And I don't know exactly how many hours he did, but it was over a period of time. And he wrote this book on the experience. And one of the reasons, like I mentioned, that his unexpected mentor, the nun, who told him the direct truth, and he realized that and it reminded me of when Mother Teresa died and people got to read her journals. She had a very low self-esteem, and she really battled the darkness in herself almost constantly. And Nouwen did that, and some of the greatest spiritual leaders and folks who just, say, well, they're walking in the very presence of God all the time, are some of the ones who have struggled the most. And so I can understand in many ways why he was so intrigued with this painting. And in this is one of the best examples to me of Jesus being a masterful storyteller. Because you can feel the tension and the suspense going up continuously. So I wanted to ask y'all questions about both boys. How many different ways does the younger son insult his father?
By asking for his inheritance, presuming that he didn't care if he was alive or dead, that he'd rather for him to be dead.
I mean, that's still an insult today. It's not just the ancient world.
Well, I think that he left, took everything, and not only did he leave his father's house, he left his country. He went to a foreign land.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been much less of an insult to say, can I have what's probably going to be my stock, and I'll stay here and set up another business and help us to do something different. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to take in how deep of a wound that had to be. what they had to do, and another thing I had a little bit later, is to liquidate property and assets. They couldn't do that. The dad couldn't do that, like going up to Bank of America and getting a cashier's check. I mean, that took time to do that. And so the older son and the mom would have been aware of all this going on. And we don't get all of that underlayment of things. But that had to be an ugly time, and yeah, he left. I'm violating everything that I am for something else, and I don't know what it is, but I'm leaving. How does the older son insult his father?
Well, at the end, by not coming into the banquet. I'm sure before that, he may have insulted his father, like, are you nuts? Giving this kid all this resources?
Well, and I did, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but I did some midrash on this, that if the father is still waiting on him to come back and hopes and believes that someday he is coming back, his room would have been left the same. And the image that I use today is we're keeping that chair at the table. Even though I think it would just run all over the older son every time. And that's why I imagined him saying he just came and got his meal and went to another part of the house or outside or somewhere. I don't want to be in this space.
Yeah, or every night light a candle in the window
Yeah.
when the older son knows that everybody is inside. What do we need a candle for? You know?
Yeah. And he also refused to call him by name. Your son, that son of yours, I have no ownership of anything or no connection with him. I have relinquished my brotherhood with him. And then the dad kind of turned it around and said, this brother of yours was dead, essentially. And he's now found and he's back. Don't you have a little bit of room? Okay, let's turn it around. Keitha, why don't you say a few things about what y'all talked about on Tuesday?
We talked about the two brothers and that both of them basically did not need their father or thought they did not need their father. And then we talked about who we thought the prodigal really was. And because the definition of prodigal means extravagantly wasteful, we decided that it was the father. Because he gave both sons everything that he had. And the father was extravagantly wasteful with his love. Not only his money and his possessions, but his love.
And I think intentionally Rembrandt painted the father as a very wearied man. I mean, he's bent over, and not only to embrace his son who's on his knees begging for mercy, but he is painted as a man who life has worn down. And then some commentators say that the person who is visible but the most recessed looks like the mom maybe. And the one standing and looking down, a number of commentators say that's the older brother who is just seething. And then maybe the person sitting down may be like the father's business manager or accountant or a tax collector. And then all kind of answers about who or what is that little visage in the back. Okay, how does the younger son honor his father at the end? Is there any honoring there?
Well, he says that, please consider me one of your slaves. That I do not want any more things from you. I know what I have done and I am sorry.
And one of my favorite phrases in the gospel is, when he came to himself.
When he came to himself, that sort of indicates that while he was talking to himself about going home, he was really being a con artist. And it wasn't until his father so openly welcomed him that he came to himself.
Okay. You could say that he was being a little bit of Jacob on the way home, getting his speech just right. And hopefully my dad won't put me in jail, have me imprisoned, or things like that.
Well, I think he also honored his father by accepting the robe and the ring. Because he could have easily said, no, I don't deserve it. I want to be your slave. I don't want to be your son. In fact, when he said, I want to be a slave, he implied he didn't want to be the son anymore because he didn't merit it. And we can all nod our heads and say, yeah, you didn't merit it. But the father offered him ability to come back into the family. And he honored him by accepting it too. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine if the father, the owner, is this generous, then another line of extension of this text that the slaves and the hired hands have a fairly good situation. That this man is consistently caring for people and understanding their worth. The older son, I think you could say, honored his dad by his hard work. But once the story winds out, you kind of wonder, why all the hard work? Is he expecting more than he should be expecting? And one of the things that I've not been able to work into a sermon on this parable, but that I think the daddy might have said is, son, he said, you've been with me always and everything I have is yours. All you had to do was ask. I'm not a hard man. Haven't you noticed that? But you've distanced yourself from me all your life. And I've wanted to love you, but you haven't really given me a chance. And did you not ask because you thought I was going to refuse? I mean, you saw what I did for the boy. I'd do at least that for you.
yeah.
If you look at him as being the religious group, you could also think that he was so wrapped up in legalism and rules and regulations that he thought he was perfect.
But in a sense, there may be a situation where the younger lad was Papa's favorite. And the older lad knew that.
Kind of like Joseph.
Kind of like Joseph. Now, that was exactly who I was thinking of, that, Jacob and Joseph were really tight, and the coat of many colors and how well it was received by his brothers, his older brothers. It just seems that's a theme throughout ancient times that there was always a favorite. And it might be a teaching for those of us that have only 2 children that you got to be careful.
Yeah, and Rachel was the intended wife, but
Yeah.
Laban slid Leah in under cover of darkness and everything. So yeah, that is kind of a responding theme. One of the things that I try to do in my sermons periodically, along following Jesus' example especially, is to leave enough openings at the end that the hearers need to work on finishing the sermon themselves. I've been told numerous times you finished your sermon too soon. Not because it was short, but because I wanted you to answer the questions for me. And there are times, especially when dealing with parables, that you have to sit with it yourself and find that direction. And again, Jesus is such a phenomenal storyteller. So let's run some scenarios doing Christian midrash. And in the Jewish tradition, we find their midrash are the rabbinical extensions and interpretation in the Mishnah, the Talmud, where they pull out unaddressed issues or interpretations. We never hear in this story about the mom.
Right.
But she's witness to all of this. I mean, and Rembrandt puts her, according to the scholars, in the picture, in the painting. What would it have been like to be the mom in this situation? Maybe.
Sad, very sad.
Okay.
I bet you felt the loss as much as the father. The loss of the younger son leaving.
Him leaving, and then probably the older son getting more and more distant with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And to have someone that's expressing that passively, aggressively in the household and seeing them every day had to have broken the mom's heart.
Well, and I think not even being consulted or asked when the son comes to ask for his inheritance, the father capitulates, but you don't ever see that he went to his wife and say, well, what do you think?
That's part of their culture.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, the Jewish mother kind of keeps the household together.
I mean, finally, Judaism is a matriarchy.
Yeah.
Because that's how you get a mignon, is through the mother's lineage,
Yeah.
not the father. Yeah. So, but again, those are some of the unanswered questions. And also, one of the most striking things that Nowen saw, and a number of people have written about, that if you look at the father's hands, they're different. Over here, the right hand is the fingers are longer and more subtle. The left hand fingers are shorter and the hand is more muscular. And so almost all the art scholars say the father represents the wholeness of God in loving this son completely as a dad and as a mom, and representing both of the parents. Because I mean, you can say those hands are not of the same kind, and to me that was a phenomenal revelation of Rembrandt to do that. Think about some other midrash here. Okay, the boy's back. Like in Top Gun, Maverick is recommitting, re-engaging.
Well, I think there's always a question. And the older brother's response or action. What you miss is, was he invited? Did the father send a slave out into the field and say, come on in, your brother's back?
That seems to be absent.
And that's absent. Now, was that part of the thought process, or was it considered not relevant to the story?
Yeah. And see, I think you can write some phenomenal one-act plays, taking this parable and running it several different ways, like Kierkegaard did with Abraham's responding to the sacrificing of Isaac in fear and trembling, when Kierkegaard said, okay, let's look at it this way, and then we're going to run it another direction, then we're going to run it another direction. But I think you could have some very interesting interactions in thinking about, did the older brother and the younger brother finally resolve things? And one of the things I thought about that's another background, like Joseph being the favorite and Rachel being the favorite, is remember when Esau and Jacob parted, and Esau promised Jacob, the next time I see you, I promise you I'm going to kill you. And Jacob ran from that for a long time, and then Esau, he couldn't run from him anymore, and he was scared to death. And Esau says, behold, I see the face of God. I don't have any more anger in me. It's gone. And I think that also is a background for Jesus telling this story. So one of the questions I think that all of us have to answer is who to forgive, including ourselves, where we've disappointed ourselves or disappointed others. And the question sometimes that people have, can I forgive someone if they never ask for forgiveness? Can I do that?
I think yes, because quite often you're still not together with that person. That there's been a separation, you've gone your way and they've gone their way, and there's no way to get back together. And for your own peace of mind with God,
Yeah.
I think you can.
Well, I think your example you chose with Esau and Jacob, when Jacob was coming back from living with Laban with the women and all, and they're about to cross over and encounter Esau, and he puts the women up front, he goes to the back, right? All this fear, and yet Esau has already forgiven him.
Yeah.
You know, he forgave him without Jacob asking for forgiveness. And so, yeah, to me the answer is yes. In fact, for your own health, you need to do that.
Well, and I've never seen anybody writing on that. Maybe I've missed it. But to talk about how Esau made that journey, to say, this is killing me, this is eating me up, and how God worked with him. And again, that's not in the text, but it happened somehow. And I think God was in the midst of that. And I'd love for somebody to, maybe I'll write that story someday, just a short story about that, of, you know, a miracle happened with Esau. Probably a number of us have our own stories of wrestling with forgiveness. And one that I have not yet gotten to the end of is that when I was well, we were so small at Sherrill's Ford that we just had an elementary school that went from 1 to 8 and then to high school. And a distant relative of mine, probably a 5th or 6th cousin, was 1 year ahead of me in school. And it started when we were both playing sports together in 7th and 8th grades, and it got even worse in high school. but he bullied me constantly. And I mean, I did everything I could to avoid him, and I could not get him to stop. And he sometimes got other people involved because I was a runt. When I got to high school, I was 4 feet 8 and weighed 88 pounds. So I was a punching bag. He graduated, and I finished high school and went on, and several years later, I heard that he was in prison because he had committed several felony batteries and had anger and violence issues. And I had some satisfaction in that. And it's still there, son. And he's still alive. And I'm trying to figure out through prayer and everything, do I have the courage to set up a meeting with him? And to just let him know how much hell he caused me for years. But I'm still trying to forgive him for that. But it's still there somewhat. And it pains me still to this day, and that was 50 years ago. And I'm still not free of it, and I need to be. And I think probably a lot of people have that, some things that are old and crusted that we still need to work on. And so that's one of my challenges. And this, I keep coming back to this to say, I'm still not the father. I'm still hooked in being one or both of the sons. So, other responses, other reflections? Okay, I hope that you will continue to pray and think about places in your life where we're still held captive by things that we still won't let go of. And sometimes, like Esau, they've already forgiven us, or even if we brought it up, they would still hold on to it. So this is a struggle of our humanity, and I hope and pray that we will all continue to make progress. So let's pray together. God, sometimes we keep ourselves in prison. And yes, there have been times that we have been insulted, we have been damaged, we have been hurt, we have been crushed. But at the same time, either through not knowing what we were doing or maybe even doing it on person, there have been times and places that we've done the same. So help us, oh God, with this path of forgiveness, and help us to continue to grow into being the parents, the father and mother who can welcome the wayward children home. Be with us this week and protect us and guide us. In Jesus' name, amen.